Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Hugo. My pronouns are they and it, and I am a self-taught artist, a trained and accomplished musician, and an aspiring drag clown. Today I will be walking you all through the artistic decisions I made while drawing a self-portrait. I will start by disclaiming that, much like Julia Lane in her dissertation, impossibility aside, clowning in the scholarly context, my presentation, my notes, my drawing, and even my understanding of myself changed and became more concise while simultaneously giving me more questions through each pass. In her foreword, Lane says, "I'm interested in deepening my connection with and understanding of clown, processes which for me rely on spirals of inquiry and exploration of many facets of thinking, being, and doing." Unfortunately, I have 10 minutes, and that's not enough time to take you through every pass of this spiral and describe everything I learned about myself, my community's history, and the art forms I'm aspiring to. I will absolutely exceed the time limit if I do that. I will therefore condense this presentation to one turn. Come on. I'm going to start with how my personal experiences led me to choose this particular performance, that of drag and clowning, as a way to present myself. In describing these forms that I'm invoking, it will lead us into the philosophy that made them. From there, I will describe how this project informed my understanding of myself and hopefully describe to you what it means when I say that my gender is clown. I hope you will all take a turn to play with these ideas as well. Alright, now it may go without saying that I did not always aspire to this particular version of myself, but rather, like selecting reference image to study, I was making a particular choice. I celebrate making the choice about how I present myself now because it's not one that I could make as a child. Growing up, without knowing the grown-up words for what I was, and without any malice, I was alienated from and by my peers as a kid. I didn't socialize easy because I was hard of hearing and I experienced emotional extremes that are associated with ADHD. I had difficulty understanding certain social rules about when it's appropriate to laugh, when it's not appropriate to laugh. I didn't socialize with peer groups of girls or boys, so I did not understand the rules of being either, because I wasn't one. I was different and goofy and attention-seeking and dramatic and fabulous, which leads me then to clowning and drag. So naturally, I hybridized the brightest, most dramatic, and most attention-seeking performance art forms. While many people know of drag through glamorous drag queens like RuPaul, who dress to be almost more glamorous and more effeminate than any real woman ought to be, drag holds more in its meaning than just that. Jake Hall, in The Art of Drag, describes the broadest sense of it, using aesthetic and artistic tricks to disrupt our idea of what it means to look like a man or a woman, or even just a person. It's the art of playing with gender. I start with this smaller circle here because that's where my inquiry started. However, as I studied more and more, I found that drag lives quite comfortably under the umbrella of clowning. The clown rules that are mentioned here are going to be described in further detail in the next slide, but Julia Lane cites another clown, Laurel Butler, in saying, "Clown is not something you learn, but rather a process of unlearning the obstacles that exist to us accessing the clown rules within ourselves." So to the far right are the clown rules that I mentioned on the previous slide, and I encourage you to pause and read them. You can read them in order of the spiral, you can read them opposite, any order you want. The point of it being presented this way by Lane is to show that these rules aren't really hierarchical rules. They are things to remember when you are engaging in the performance art of clowning. Lane brings this spiral tighter by identifying four foundational principles of clowning. The magic of co-creation refers to the creative space that clowns create with their audience, where by disregarding the fourth wall respected by most performance arts, clowns engage in their audience with an open, honest, two-way conversation. the conversation calls necessarily for vulnerability. While particularly sensitive individuals, Lane describes as wearing their hearts on their sleeves, clowns, she says, take it a step further and wear their hearts on their faces. The metaphor of the red nose is that of experiencing everything heavily, of being vulnerable in front of an audience. In choosing to paint my red nose on, I put on a tiny little mask that tells my audience that everything I experience, my joy, my misery, my surprise, my humor, are all going to be dialed up to 11. And in allowing myself to ignore the societal expectations that I will dial that down, I get to behave as I don't normally. I get to explore my impulses and reactions in a clearer light, and Lane uses masks to describe this experience of multiplicity. She says masks often reveal a persona which initially seems other to our habitual experience of ourselves. But by playing around in the space that those masks create, we're able to recognize the possibilities that exist outside of our own normal everyday life. The freedom to play in a space where every possibility, including failure, can be taken and run with in a big old yes and. This then leads us to transgression. She describes this one as the practice is about getting beyond our habitual experiences of everyday life in order to experience something other. Whether by demonstrating precisely why common sense is supposed to be common, or to point at what is considered a social rule and laugh at it, clowns have special license to perform transgressions for entertainment. Unfortunately, transgression is not a performance for everybody, but rather a part of their life. It's necessary to connect to people and challenge their understandings of what is and isn't acceptable, because the price when people decide that one's existence is unacceptable can range anywhere from ostracization to death. Gilbert Baker, the man who created the rainbow pride flag, was sure of himself as an artist before he was sure of himself as a gay man. Unfortunately, in conservative America, to express a love of beauty and craft to the point of identity, he says, is to be considered suspect. Similarly, Radford points out in his chapter, Colorophobia, defined as the fear of clowns, that while there is no medical literature supporting any specific phobia of clowns, that it's such a commonly taught and indoctrinated fear that comedian Bobcat Goldthwait is quoted as saying, "Most people get nervous when they see clowns because they give off this vibe that they're going to make you touch their penis." As if that's not the most unfounded and mean-spirited thing to say about an entire class of performers whose abilities and range outstrip his. While few people would admit to being oppressive to disabled people in those words, the tolerance for disability is incredibly conditional. To behave in a way that is not typical, because you cannot, because it hurts, because it feels wrong, is to be feared for behaving inhuman. I quote Radford here because while he is describing clowns in this text, the parallels between clown fear and ableism trace back to the inception of clowning, because ableism is the older force here. And now that there isn't a saw going, moving on. To be queer is to be endlessly policed. Whether for cross-dressing, soliciting sex, which is respected in the community as cruising, sex outside of marriage because we aren't allowed to marry, or simply being publicly indecent, fundamentalist sensibilities punish people for having anything other than purely reproductive sex, to the point of ignoring epidemics like AIDS and blatant acts of genocide. To that end, just being weird is punished by hegemonic powers. In Bad Clowns, Benjamin Radford discusses the Northampton clown, who hung around in the area at night starting somewhere around October 2013. Despite not harming anybody, and even going so far as to pose for pictures, the clown later said he'd gotten over 1,000 death threats for his performance. Now, this may raise questions from some people, which would generously boil down to this. Why would I bother? Why would I bother being a clown? Why would I bother with drag? Why would I bother not being a man or a woman? Wouldn't it just be easier? And to answer that, I refer back to the clown rules 2 slides ago, specifically what Lane and her teachers refer to as the overall everything rule. I'm doing this to get myself off. Now that can be interpreted in the crudest way, and I encourage you to give that a shot, but in a more broad sense. Okay. No, sir. In the most broad sense, what this rule means to get yourself off is to feel with as much depth and fulfillment as you can everything. It's harder to be this way, but the joy that I get in being a clown, in letting go of the things that have hurt me and have told me that I needed to hide, is no way diminished by that nonsense. So my self-portrait is a monumental test of my skill. This is the first time that I have applied certain artistic skills such as grids to lay out images more accurately. It's the first time that I've drawn such heavily patterned clothing with folds. And in researching for this project, it's not the first time that I have deeply considered and inquired to myself why I feel the way I do, but it's by far the deepest. I feel more secure now in my identity as a clown, and I greatly look forward to finding out what I'm going to learn about myself next. All right. Thank you all for listening. I hope you all take a turn of your own to look at your own experiences, the performances you maintain for your audiences, and perhaps find and affirm something that gets you all off.